We all make decisions every day. This week I decided to trim my beard. It was a bad decision. My decision to trim my beard without wearing my glasses was a worse decision. So I could not read on the little guards anymore what they are. I was looking for a number 4. I clearly did not add the number 4. We make decisions every day, and some of them have consequences that last years, and some of them have consequences that'll last a couple of weeks. You've made a decision to be here today. You could be at the beach. You could be having brunch. It's too late. You're here, so you have to stay. And whether you're a Christ follower or not, making decisions is something that we all need help with. What is supposed to separate us from animals is that we don't act on instinct. What is supposed to separate us as human beings is not only the fact that we were created to worship God, partner with Him, and be in intimate fellowship with Him, but what separates us is that we as human beings are meant to be able to make intentional choices and decisions, conscious of the fact that those decisions can have consequences. As an example, I don't think we will ever view a Coldplay concert in the same way, right? For those of you who don't know what that's about, a series of horrible choices and decisions. And so some of those decisions, it's unlikely that we are ever going to be in a place where our decision is so publicly clarified as a very poor choice. Unlikely that we'll be in that. But we are very likely to be in a position where the kinds of decisions that were made in that circumstance would be made by us. We are unlikely to be in a place where the decisions that we make have dramatic consequences for millions of people. Unlikely to be in a position where in the 1980s we fund and support someone that we believe is an ally that turns out to be Osama bin Laden. Unlikely that our decisions are going to have those kinds of consequences. But our decisions do have consequences beyond us individually and beyond our nuclear family. Should I marry this person? Should I have a child? Should I go back to school? Should I buy this house? Should I accept this promotion? Should I sell this business? Should I? How do we make these calls and decisions? As human beings, we are constantly trying to outrun the companions of fear, anxiety, and regret, and we're constantly chasing faith and peace. And none of that is possible without understanding the one that gives us ultimate peace and without being in intimate fellowship with Jesus Christ. And so this morning, as we continue our series of Old Wisdom for a New World, we look at what it looks like to make some good choices and decisions. And we're going to be looking at Proverbs 3, verses 1 to 8. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck and write them on the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. And now this is the part we all know. Trust the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. This is the word of God. We've said a couple of times as we've gone through the series that wisdom is the correct application of knowledge through intimate relationship with Jesus, empowered by the Spirit, resulting in a life that flourishes, lived for the glory of God the Father, and then Vic added, and the benefit of others. Now, I'm not asking you to remember all of that. That's not the point of this. But basically to say this, we often take verses 5 and 6 out of the context of Proverbs. And Proverbs 3 starts with a clarity and it ends with a clarity of this is only available to us. The ability to make good decisions is only available to us with a foundation of favor and good success and love through our relationship with God. What does it actually mean to trust in God? What does it mean to lean not on our own understanding? What does it mean to acknowledge Him, to not be wise in our own eyes, and to avoid evil. And so this morning we're going to look at how ancient wisdom helps us to navigate decision making. And we're going to be looking at 4 things: investigating our heart, trusting our God, investigating the facts, and then taking that step of faith. We need to investigate our hearts. Proverbs 16, verse 1 to 3 says, "The plans of the heart belong to the man, but the answer is from the tongue. But the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. All the ways of a man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established." In Jeremiah 17, verse 9 and 10, he says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his deeds." Well, Nick, if our hearts are so wicked, why does God want them? Because only God can heal our hearts and transform us so that we can act in a way that is for our good and for his glory. God is not wagging our fingers saying your heart is deceitful and leaving it at that. God is saying, because your heart is deceitful, come to me so that you are not deceived by what is in your heart. The word heart, both in Greek and in Hebrew, speaks more than just a muscle that pumps blood to your bodies. It talks about our will and deepest desire. It's the sum of all of our affections. When Jesus challenged the Pharisees in Matthew 15, he says to them, "You hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men.'" One of the key things when it comes to decision making and to be able to make choices that don't have negative consequences but multiply in good consequences is the ability to expose our own hidden hearts to ourselves. Often, it's more important than knowing the pertinent facts about the situation. This does not mean that facts are irrelevant. It just means that they are subservient to what is happening in your soul. It's not as simple as a pros and cons list. One of the first things we need to do when we're faced with a big decision is to actually invite the Spirit of God in and to say, "Expose my heart and show me any hidden thing that is within me, any desire, any perspective that I have that is going to affect the way in which I make this decision." The challenge is that our hearts often betray us and we don't even realize this. Proverbs 21 verse 2 says, "Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart." Now, I don't want you to put your hands up, but basically we've been going through the book of Proverbs. We are in chapter 20. We have 11 more chapters to go. And how many of you noticed how many times in the book of Proverbs God talks about the abomination of unfair scales? Have you guys reached that? Why is that such a big deal? So let me show you what scales in the Old Testament were and what God was talking about. What someone would do in those days is they would go to a store and they would say, "I want X amount of pounds of cheese or X amount of pounds of maize," or whatever. And what God is talking about when he is saying it's an abomination to use false weights is the trader would have a weight that would be, for example, 1 pound. But that weight would be much, much lighter than 1 pound. And so what he would do is he would end up double charging the person. And so he would put the false weight on, which is what is being talked about, and he would say to the person coming, "This is 2 pounds of weight, and so you owe me 2 pounds of currency." We got that? What God is saying is like, this is an abomination. This is the way that you cheat people. This is the way that you exploit people. But God is also saying there that I, perfect God, am weighing the heart. I want to discover what is dishonest in you about the way in which you weigh things out. The way in which you look at a situation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the dishonest weights that you have. Because we like to think that our own understanding leads to rational and logical and godly decisions. But the truth is, often our understanding is shaded by what is in our own hearts. Our own hearts often want what is contrary to the moral purpose of God. We are often unaware of what's in our hearts. We think that we're pure, but we're not. We're not meant to follow our hearts. I've preached about this before. Jesus never said, follow your heart. He said, follow me. And when we follow Jesus, we realize that there are things in our hearts, the unsubmitted desires, that make it actually more difficult to follow Jesus. But the good news is this: the more we train ourselves through submission to the Spirit to follow Jesus, the more our purposes, our heart, our plans align with His. It's that scripture that says, God will grant you the desires of your heart. You know that scripture? That's a false quote, because it starts with, delight yourself in the Lord, and He will grant you the desires of your heart. The more we delight ourselves in God, the more our desires kind of dovetail with His desires. And of course, it's His good pleasure to give those things to us. When we search our hearts, we figure out whether we are being immature or whether we're being rebellious. Now, I had a little video of this, but I'm not able to show it. Kingston was, how old was he? He was about 1.5 years, and his parents know what's good for him, and they say to him, Kingston, you're going to go to bed now. And so he's standing at the cot, and he's falling asleep, and in his own will and his heart, he knows he's not tired. Right, parents? How many of you know that you can trust a child to tell you whether they're tired or not? And so Kingston is holding his hair up like this. I wish I could have shown it for you. He's holding his hair up because his head is wanting to do this. And he's pulling his head up like this. And the video has Mitch and Michaela recording their little monitor. I'm so glad you've kept this, because you can show it to him on his 21st birthday. And show him how the heart is deceitful above all things. And what we think is best for us is not always what's best for us. And some of us have that kind of Kingston approach where we make those decisions and actually say, no, I'm not tired. I'm going to stand here for as long as I can. And I'm not going to trust my parents, and I'm going to trust what's happening in me, because whatever is happening in me is I'm going to follow my heart. When we ask the Spirit of God, say, examine my heart, weigh my heart, and God can actually say to you, Nick, you're being immature or you're being rebellious. I would say that when you don't pay attention to immaturity, it can lead to rebellion. But one of the things you've got to ask God for is, God, am I being immature? Do I know what it is that you want me to do and I just don't want to do it? Is it difficult for me to do, which is why I don't want to do that? Is this going to mean danger for me? When the Father says no, we need to look in our hearts and we need to say, what is my reaction? How is it affecting my view of Him? How is it affecting my trust of Him? It's our hidden heart that leads us subconsciously towards a decision. And it's often not about the facts of the situation. It's about this tangled mess of needs, emotions, and fears that swirl around in my heart that make the decision even more difficult, because now I have mixed motives. And most of us know that the most difficult decision to make is not a decision that is clearly between good and evil, but it's a decision where there's a mixed motive involved. For example, the desire to be in a relationship. The desire to be in a relationship is something that God desires for His people. But the way in which we approach that, the idol that we make of that relationship, the reality that we are not going to follow God's law on purity when it comes to seeking out that relationship, those are where the mixed motives come in. And that's when we are trying to do this and saying to God, no, I'm not sure you know better. I want to do what I want to do. C.S. Lewis says this: the head rules the belly through the chest. The head rules the belly through the chest. What on earth does that mean? Okay. It's a very succinct way of saying that we think that we are so logical, and ultimately when it comes to decision making, we are going to make the right decision. No, it means that the intellect rules the desires that are in our belly based on what we value in our heart, in the deepest parts of us. That's why you'll find yourself sitting there thinking one day, what did I do? How did I get here? Because I didn't invite God to expose my hidden heart and to show me what's in there, and to show me ultimately what could happen if I make that call and that decision. We need to investigate and examine our hearts. We need to allow God to weigh our hearts. Trust your God. Acknowledge Him. Verse 5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. Have you guys ever watched two men try and acknowledge each other as they walk towards each other? And they're walking. So, in fact, sometimes it's not even a vocal thing. Sometimes it's just like a head up, like, I see you, I acknowledge you. How many of you men have been shopping with your wife and she's trying on a whole bunch of things and you're sitting down in the chair of shame? Have you guys know what I'm talking about? You don't know what I'm talking about? Okay, do they still have chairs of shame? Like in department stores, and you see another man holding his wife's purse there, and you just acknowledge, yeah, we are the same. This is acknowledge and trust in God is not saying, yes, I know there's a God somewhere. Trust is much, much deeper than this. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. That word there means to know on a deep level, not just to notice, but to listen, to learn from, to realize that God is the one that is leading you. How do we know and trust God? We know God's character through His works, through His commands, through His warnings. All of that we know through the Scriptures. We know in terms of the way in which He's worked in the past. You know, when someone says, trust me, what is our response to that often? I don't know you. Why would I trust you? Well, God is saying, trust me. And I've given you hundreds and thousands of reasons why you can trust me. I don't know why people don't believe me when I say trust me. It obviously has to do with my nature. But you can tell when someone doesn't trust you, because saying trust me is not enough. The world is not leading us towards a countercultural, sacrificial, gospel-centered decision-making process. The world is leading us to what's in this for me. And what God thinks about every situation is covered by His Word. And it's often not a negotiation. And that's probably why we don't want to do it. We don't want to search our hearts because it reveals the ickiness in our soul. We don't want to go and to look at the nature and character of God because there is more clarity there than we think there is there. And we don't want to make a decision that goes against my comfort, my culture, and my convenience. And we look at God, we acknowledge Him, we trust Him, we say, okay, God, I want to understand who I am and what are some of the things that drive me. I want to understand who you are and the nature and character and attributes of God and how that's going to inform the decision. But I also want to be able to look at the facts of the situation. And I want you to be able to look at the facts of the situation and not the scenario that your neuroticism paints with the facts. Because facts and scenarios are different. And facing the facts is not faithless. The Bible tells us that Abraham faced the fact that he was dead and trusted God. Abraham knew that if something was going to happen between him and Sarah, it would have to be a supernatural thing. Facing the facts is something that Jesus tells us. Jesus tells us in one of His parables, which one of you, if he wants to build a tower, doesn't look to see if he has enough supplies before he even starts building? Which one of you going out to war doesn't look to see if he has enough men to be able to do that? There is nothing wrong with actually looking at simple facts and saying, okay, is a cursory look at the simple facts, is that going to help me make this decision? The problem with facts is that they become a little more slippery based on your emotion and your personality. They're often shaded by our natural optimism or pessimism, faith or bravado. Some of you will know the story. Karen and I were in Beijing. This was before they had done all the translation for English. In fact, one of my favorite translations was they had obviously just fed this into Google, and one of the signs that we saw above the door was, "Pay attention to your skull." And so I was like, oh, mind your head. Okay, that's what that means. But Karen and I were lost. We were in the Beijing subway. This was before cell phones. And we were sitting there, and I was saying to Karen, isn't this amazing? We have no idea where we are. We don't know the language. We just have to kind of follow our noses. And Karen is like, are you kidding me? We don't know the language. Nobody knows where we are. And our natural bent of optimism, pessimism versus risk-taking and faith, and it affects the facts. The way she viewed the facts versus the way in which I viewed the facts were a little different. And so as we look at our own hearts, as we examine who God is, as we look at the facts, we need to understand that you can make some poor decisions on the same set of facts because of the way in which you operate. We were on an island once off the coast of Malaysia called Penang, and off the island of Penang is a tiny little island. It's kind of like the Alcatraz of Malaysia. It's called Jerajak. And so Karen and I decided, well, actually I decided, and Karen said yes, we were going to walk around the whole island because we hadn't exercised in a while, so we're going to walk around the whole island. It's a tiny little island, but we came to a place where we could not walk around the island anymore. And so, based on the facts, I made a very clear and clarifying decision that we're just going to cut through the middle of the island and get back to the resort in which we're at. So we cut through the middle of the island, not through the middle of the island. We ended up at the top of the island, and we faced the massive ocean. And now we don't know where we are, we don't know what we're doing. And we're sitting there, and I'm also feeling like this is cool. This is, all we have to do is walk a little more, and then Karen is just like fading every hour. So we decided, okay, let's walk along the beach, and we find a fish farm. Do you guys know what a fish farm is? It's like out in the ocean, they set up these huge big nets, and they kind of live out there, and they farm fish on the ocean. And I'm screaming to the person to come and to get us because we couldn't walk because of the cliffs on either side of us. No one is responding. Then I think, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make an even better decision. I'm going to take some money out of my pocket, and I'm going to wave it around for someone to come and get us. And did that work? Of course it worked. We had 2 boats come, straight to us. Then we have the language problem, and I say to the person, can you take us to the resort? And he just nods, and he heads off in an easterly direction. And then Karen says, do you know where he's taking us? Do you know who he is? Do you know what could potentially happen to us? And I'm like, no, he's taking us to the hotel. And the guy turns around and he says, hotel? And I said, yes, hotel. Oh, and then he turns the boat around, and then he goes somewhere else. We eventually got there. I think what I'm trying to say with these stories, and you're like, what are you trying to say? Is that the way in which we view the facts is affected by our experiences, by our hearts, by the way in which we normally function. I'm not even going to tell you about 87, never mind. Well, I will. 88% of deaths in the Darwin Awards are men, right? Ladies, come on, I thought you would have enjoyed that. The Darwin Awards are when men do something stupid enough that they die. Okay, that's a Darwin Award. 88% of them are men. Why should we get counsel? Well, after we remind ourselves of who we are, we remind ourselves of the character of God, we look at the facts, we need to get counsel. Proverbs 18 verses 1-2 says, whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Proverbs is full of proverbs that are telling us to seek out wise counsel. In a multitude of counselor, there is safety. Now, I would say this, that most people don't include the community or don't bypass counsel out of pride or rebellion, though some do. I remember a situation where someone in our leadership team was asking a couple, hey, who have you sought counsel with about this decision that you're making? And their response to them was, I am a something adult. I don't need anyone's permission. So I would say that yes, there are those people that respond out of pride and rebellion, but oftentimes part of the reason that we don't get counsel within the context of our community is that we believe the lie that our life, our presence, our impact, our ministry, our relationships are irrelevant to the people around us. So why should I consider the community? It's not a negative perspective of the community, it's a negative perspective of yourself. You have the idea that if you were to just up and go, no one would care. Well, let me tell you this, that is not true. The Bible tells us that we are members one of another. The decisions that we make in following Christ, the decisions we make in order to elevate Jesus Christ, the decisions that we make that are counter-cultural affect every one of us. In the West, the overriding desire in our decision-making is what is best for me, what is going to fulfill me, what will gain me the most money, status, power, authority. But in more communal cultures, there is always a sense of what is best for that community. Now, those of you that are married will know that the idea of individual decision-making is over. You don't get to make decisions without taking another person's feelings, desires, and fears into account. We make different decisions because together we're actually forming a community in terms of which we're married. We make sacrificial decisions. We make decisions that are better for our spouses and for our children than we do for ourselves. But in the context of the world in which we live in, it's very unlikely that we have been shaped by this reality. I was talking to someone who had asked, how many of you have been asked for help by someone and then are really confused by the fact that they never listen to you? Is that just me? Just me? This is my favorite saying. This is a way of saying, I'm not going to do that. If you want to tell someone I'm not going to do that, this is a polite way of saying it. I'll take that under consideration. Right? That means I'm never going to do that. That's what that means. Problem is, sometimes you receive too much counsel. We're either on this side where we have too little or too much, and I call it the counseling carousel. And how many of you have tried to make a decision before and you've gone to one person and you're like, okay, I know what to do. And then you go speak to another person and you're like, oh dear, now I don't know what to do. And let me actually get as much information as I can. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pool our mutual ignorance and we're going to come up with the worst idea possible. That's what's going to happen. Isolation or asking everybody their opinion is not what we need to be looking for. We need to be looking for trusted people and leaders that are able to tell us the truth when we need to hear the truth. Let's be honest. Most of us are not looking for the truth. Most of us are looking for the affirmation of the decision that has been stirring in our hearts all along. And we want someone to come and say, follow your heart. That's what most of us want. Most of us say that, it's another phrase that I've heard, if you've used it, and I'm not saying everyone who uses this phrase is doing the same thing, but I've asked some trusted friends. When you use that phrase, make sure that those trusted friends have permission and access to say no to you. To say, I don't think this is a good idea. I think that this is something that your heart really desperately wants, and I understand that, but I don't think that this is going to be good for you. When you go for counsel, understand the kind of person that you're going to. Are they your cheerleader? Like there's nothing that you can do that is wrong? Or are they always the person that is pointing out why you can't do something? Understand, are they a cheerleader or are they a coach? When you go for counsel, don't start with, God told me. Well, okay, conversation over. If God told you, then either you'll be disobedient if you don't do whatever God told you to do, or God is a liar. So we're kind of stuck here. And when you go to a counsel, don't use that. If you have a sense that God is speaking to you, whether it's a sense through dreams or whether God spoke to you prophetically or whatever, this is one of the best things to do. Go to someone you trust, one of your leaders, and say, help me understand this. Help me to test this. This is what I'm sensing. This is what I'm feeling. The family of God is not there to give you permission. The family of God is there to give you perspective. Leaders are not there to make decisions for you. Leaders are there to help you understand your heart, to help you understand the nature and character of God, to help you understand the facts, and to lead you in a way that you can actually say, God, thank you for all these things that you've given to me as ingredients. I'm going to make this kind of decision. A lot of the times when people come for counsel, they just want someone to put the cherry on the top. They've baked the cake, they've frosted it, everything is right. They just want someone to put the cherry on the top. When you go for counsel, take all the ingredients to that person and say, this is my flour, this is my water, this is what I'm thinking of making. What do you think? Now, giving counsel. This is as important as receiving counsel. Proverbs 20, verse 5 says this, the purpose in a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. 18, verse 13 says, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. If you have the privilege to receive someone that is asking you for counsel, and often, guys, I want to say this, often it's not in a very formal way. Oftentimes, someone's not going to kind of sit down with you and have a coffee and say, okay, Melissa, I really want your counsel. Oftentimes, it's in a corridor moment. Someone just throws out something or is saying, hey, I'm thinking of doing this, or I'm wondering about that. Be aware, listen. If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and his shame. Listen to them, listen to God. Have I really listened to the person that has come to me for counsel? Am I really listening to God? Ask them to unveil their perspective, God's perspective on their heart, on who they believe God is, and on what the actual facts of the situation are. If you have the privilege to be counseling someone, remind that person that they are part of a kingdom that has a king, and that they are not in this rampant individualism of Orange County, and that the most important thing that they need to understand is they are subject to this king who loves them and wants what's best for them, but will often say, no, that's not good for you. If you have the privilege of having someone come to you for counsel, ask them these questions. I would say that these questions actually protect you, but they are also very good questions when you are having the privilege of sitting down with someone. This is a great question. Why are you asking me this? This will give you a bit of a clue in terms of how they see you. Maybe they're asking you because you are the cheerleader. I remember a couple in our church went for counsel. They wanted to open an escape room. And they went to a businessman in the church. And I called them and I said, how was it? And they just put their heads down. They said, he killed our dream, And I said, what do you mean? Well, he just laid out the facts. And he said that based on our gifts and talents, this would probably be a horrible idea. And I said, how do you feel? They said, well, we feel wounded, but we feel privileged that someone would do that. Now we just got to deal with the wound of feeling like we can do anything. Now we actually just got to go back to God and actually say, okay, now what? Why are you asking me? Another great question when you're being asked to give counsel is, do I have all the facts? Have you told me everything about the situation? Who else have you spoken to about this? This is how to avoid the counseling carousel. Who else have you spoken to about this? And what did they say? What did they say? Then ask God, does this person need courage or caution? Is this person the kind of person, like that businessman said, hey man, I'm just going to give you some caution here. or does this person need courage? Now, we're not just going to fill someone up and just, this is not based on, we're actually going to ask God, what do they need? Do they need courage right now? Do they need caution? Do I know them? Do I know their strengths and do I know their weaknesses? Am I able to say anything? Am I willing to look stupid and say, I don't know that I can help you? Rather than give an off-the-cuff response when someone is in a place of making decisions. Ask them if they've received any sense of kind of prophecy or words of knowledge or visions or dreams that need to be tested, as the Bible tells us. And pray with them so that they can test those things properly. One of the key things that I ask God for always is, God, is there a third way? Because often someone will come to you and say, I can either do this or I can do this. And oftentimes we can ask God and say, is there a third way that I can actually open up to this person? So that they can see who they really are, expose their heart to themselves, so that they can see who you really are, God, so they can understand the facts and they can make a decision that actually glorifies you. And then this should be obvious, but we don't always do it. Pray for them. Not just in the moment, but when you remember them, and say to them, hey, I'm going to pray for you. Thank you for inviting me into the situation. This is what I think about the situation, and I'm going to pray for you. There have been many times where people have come to me and have asked me for those kinds of things, and after the fact, God has shown me something, and I've been able to share that with them. And it's so encouraging because that doesn't come from me. That comes from their Father that loves them and wants to show them the way. This should be an obvious one. Learn from your mistakes. Probably one of my favorite scriptures in Proverbs. Like a dog that returns to its vomit is a fool that repeats his folly. Now hear me clearly. I don't want to heap shame and guilt on you for the mistakes that you've made in the past. It is essential, though, that when you look at important decisions that you're going to be making into the future, you understand what you did wrong so that you don't repeat that. When you look at where you failed in your decision-making, ask God not just about the decision. What was in my heart that made me make that decision? And have you rooted that out? Have you transformed that? Am I in a place where I can actually walk confidently knowing that I'm not going to make that same decision? And finally, we act with faith. This is probably one of the most challenging things for us to accept because we've grown up in a blame mindset. And we want to blame everyone and everything else for the decision that we've made. And so ultimately, when you're at that place of making the decision, you've got to ask yourself the question, does this glorify God? And does this align to His mission? Think about how different our decision-making would be if literally that was the question that we asked every time we made that decision. Does this glorify my Savior? Does it align with His mission? Does it align with Scripture is the obvious thing. Now, there are times where God calls us to do things that are outside of the realm of what is considered wisdom in the world. There are times where God calls Abraham and says, leave everything and go, and I will tell you as you're on the way. Now, when those kinds of decisions happen, and they happen, you have to have a clarion call in your spirit that you know God is leading you to. You cannot ignore the facts. You've got to understand how this could end up being a negative thing, and you've got to be able to trust the people around you saying, yes, Nick, I know that this seems like an unwise decision, but it seems like you've heard God, and we want to bless that. 23 years ago, I got a phone call from Chris saying, do you guys still feel like you want to plant a church in the United States? That was February. In September, 9/11 had happened. And we had given up the dream of coming here. And Chris said, for those of you that know him, doesn't mince words, basically saying, I want to be very clear for you. There is nothing for you here. There is no job. There is nothing. But if you will match your faith, we'll match ours. I don't even know what that means to this day. I don't know what that means.
And I remember going to our elders and submitting that to them and then saying, yeah, pursue that. I remember sitting with Karen and praying, saying, pursue that. I remember waking up one morning and I literally have had 2 panic attacks. That was one of them. And I can't even remember the other one, but I remember that one. And I remember thinking to myself, God, what have I done? I mean, it's okay for me and Karen, who've made this decision with all of our understanding, to move because we feel like you're telling us to move. But now we're drawing a 16-month-old child into this. What are we doing? The next morning, a lily had flowered in our backyard. We didn't even know we had lilies. And God has always used the tale of the lilies, where Jesus says, even Solomon was not dressed as well as the lilies. Do not worry about that. And I wish I could say it was like that. Game over. I didn't worry again. No. I knew in that moment that I had to act with faith. I knew that I was willing to pay the consequences. I knew that God was good. I knew that I'd searched my heart and searched my motives. And I knew that making a good decision is not always making an easy decision. And so in making that decision, we came here. I was Mr. Mom for 6 months. Poor Kiona. We went to the Home Depot every day. I kid you not. I could not stay in the house. Karen cried when she left and went to work. I cried when she left and went to work. But God has been so kind to us. And these tough decisions to follow God have led to deeper intimacy with Him. Verse 8, it will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. If I trust in God, if I don't lean on my own understanding, if I acknowledge Him and in all my ways submit to Him, then it will lead to healing of my flesh and refreshment to my bones. Do you know what that verse tells me? That my flesh will need healing, and my bones will need refreshing. That's what it tells me. It promises what Jesus promised throughout the Gospels, which is, in this world you will have trouble, but I am with you. Promises that road that He spoke of, that difficult road, is a narrow road on purpose, but it's easier because Jesus is there. But Nick, what if I make a wrong decision? Now, those of us that are so immobilized that we don't want to make any decision. And I've said this. I say, God is a restorer and a rescuer. Now, don't take that to mean what don't take it to mean, okay, whatever. I can make whatever decision, and God is covenantally bound to fix that. No, we have to deal sometimes with the consequences of the decisions. But in my life, I know that I cannot see everything perfectly. I know that I'm a broken human being. I know that sometimes, even if I've investigated my own heart, even if I've submitted myself and I've said, God, I want you to reveal your character to me. I want you to show me what are the hidden facts, what are the hidden aspects of my heart, and I make that decision, and I still make the wrong decision. And I rest in the shadow of the Almighty because He's able to restore, because that's what I need. A God that not only is able to lead me by still waters, but a God that is able to restore my soul. A God that is with me, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, His rod and staff comfort me. There's a guy called Ed Bacon. You won't know who he is. He's not related to Kevin Bacon at all. And in New Hampshire, they've developed this new law where they are charging people for rescuing them. And so a couple of years ago, actually more than 10 years ago, this guy is 59 years old, and he had an artificial hip that he had dislocated many times before. Strike one. He was going on a solo hike. Strike two. And there was a weather warning. Strike three. And so he dislocated his hip on the middle of this 5-day hike, and so he needed to be rescued with helicopters, the whole thing. And after he was rescued, the New Hampshire county sent him a bill for $9,300, which I think is pretty cheap if you think about that, right? This is clearly a long time ago. Well, God's salvation plan is nothing like Ed Bacon and the New Hampshire County. God's salvation plan is not like this. You have to pay back for all the mistakes that you've made. There is a cost to doing this, and I'm not willing to bear that cost. The salvation that we sit in as Christ followers is the fact that God has paid every cost for us to rescue us, and that we don't have to pay that back. But Nick, you spoke about consequences. Now, guys, I know this is difficult. I know it's a very difficult thing to grasp, the idea of the fact that God can rescue us while at the same time we still are sometimes going to deal with the consequences of our own rebellion. When David sinned with Bathsheba, it says that God forgave him, but that child still died. And there is this weird mixture of God being able to rescue us from those things, but sometimes there are consequences that we have to pay. Why? Because we've seen this through the series of the wisdom literature, that when we act in a way that is contrary to the grain of the universe, we end up getting splinters. The good news of the gospel is that we can come to Jesus and we can say, I messed up. I know that I had a hip that was going to be dislocated. I know that it was bad weather. I know that I did this alone. I need you to rescue me. And God says, I will rescue you because you're my son, you're my daughter. It is my nature to pursue and rescue you. Now, I wish I could tell you. I can tell you that beyond a shadow of a doubt that God will rescue you. I wish I could tell you the degree to which you would have to bear some of the consequences of what has happened. I don't know. Sometimes God has rescued people and the consequences, and sometimes God has rescued them, but they still have to work through the consequences. Do you know what? I'll take that. Do you know why? Because He is with me. Because when I cry out, God, rescue, in the middle of this bad decision, and He comes and He rescues me, which He always does, I'd rather have Him there. Because He's still there when I have to walk through some of the difficult consequences of the decisions that I've made. Band, you can come up. What makes me confident, church, is not my ability. It's not my counsel. What makes me confident is that God's dominant character is one of rescuer, seeker, pursuer, restorer. That in the midst of any decisions that we've made, we can go to God and we can say, God, I was wrong. I need your help. We can go to God and say, God, I was wrong and I didn't know how wrong I was. We can go to God and say, yeah, I knew. Bad hip, bad weather, doing this alone. God will rescue us. In all your ways, acknowledge Him and He will make straight your paths. We live in the reality of a path that was made crooked for us by Adam and Eve. We live in the reality that when Adam and Eve sinned and said to God, we're going to make the decision to follow our hearts with a little help from the serpent, they made our paths crooked. But when Jesus came, He made our path straight. This is the challenge, though. The path is straight, but the path is also narrow. Jesus says in Matthew 7, verse 13, enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. Remember, we started this whole thing about some decisions have greater consequences than others. The most consequential decision that you can ever make is, what do you do with Jesus' claims that He is Lord and Savior of all humanity, including you? What do you do with that? Do you accept or reject those claims of Jesus? Because I can tell you this, those have eternal consequences. Those are consequences that Jesus died, was raised, and ascended the Father in order for us not to pay those consequences. But those are consequences that everyone will have to pay if they've not submitted themselves to Jesus. Your decision to place your faith in Jesus Christ is the biggest decision you will ever make. Father, in the name of Jesus, I come before you this morning deeply, deeply grateful. Grateful that you are a rescuer. Grateful that you made a decision to send your Son. Grateful that he knowingly and willingly gave his life so that we could be forgiven of our sin. Grateful that as we place our faith in Jesus, the Spirit of God comes into our souls and enables us to know the truth. Grateful that we are never alone. Grateful that when we search our hearts, whatever we find, whether it's ugly or good, we submit that to you and you are able to produce change. Grateful because you never change. Grateful because as facts change, as this world changes, the fact that you are always a redeemer and a rescuer and a restorer will never change. And so I ask for my friends, I ask for those that have never responded to an invitation of the gospel, I pray that they would make that decision this morning by your grace. I pray for those of us that are in the midst of making decisions, or those of us that have made decisions that we are now wondering whether we've made the right choice. God, I pray for confidence to hear your voice and act. Father, I pray for those that have been returning to their vomit. Free them in Jesus' name. And God, I pray that every one of us would know that you are with us. You have made a straight path. We need your counsel, my God. We need your wisdom. Come be with us as we worship you, Lord.